Support for Louisiana, the state we're in, is provided by...
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars
to keep the lights on
and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.
TikTok could go away as we know it.
TikTok app under scrutiny for security concerns.
If we get into Christmas, we're looking at maybe 20s for lows, highs in the 40s.
Preparing for extreme cold in the coming days.
The solution to the issue of carbon in the atmosphere is in the oceans.
Underground carbon capture, not so fast.
Those higher prices that we're all feeling when we go to the store, that's translating into higher sales tax revenues.
The big state budget estimates.
A plan to restore power much faster after a strong hurricane knocks it out is the big news Entergy Louisiana is pitching this week.
Yeah, a $10 billion plan over 10 years to harden the grid. The company filed it with the Public Service Commission on Monday, and that 5-member panel will take a long, hard look at it and respond at some point.
Entergy says it would strengthen about 270,000 structures and build transmission lines in some areas to withstand winds up to 150 miles per hour.
And it would be Entergy's biggest investment ever to harden the grid and be similar to what Florida did after storms blasted them in 2004 and 2005. Florida's beefed up grid held up better after Hurricane Ian this year and far better than we fared in Ida or Laura.
Almost 2 years ago, Louisiana saw record-breaking cold, with northern Louisiana temperatures plunging into the single digits. The freeze lasted for 4 days, some losing power and heat. Next week, we may not have a freeze, but we will definitely see temperatures drop again. Barry Keim, Louisiana state climatologist, is here to give us some tips on how to cope with the cold. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So the last time we were talking, you were here talking about, winter weather and having storms and tornadoes, and now we're here talking about freeze.
Yes. So I tell you what's happened. The atmosphere has set itself up into a configuration where it created a super highway for air basically out of northern Canada, perhaps even out of Siberia, going over the North Pole, and just jettisoned all that cold air down toward the Gulf Coast. And it's been a brutal day. It's been teens across northern parishes, 20s across South Louisiana, and much of the state didn't even get above freezing today. So and tomorrow, by the way, is not going to be much better.
Tomorrow's not going to be much better. What about going into next week and Christmas and all of that? What are we going to see?
Yeah, so tomorrow will be very much like today. We're probably looking at teens and 20s for lows, high temperatures in the 30s. As we get into Christmas, we're looking at maybe 20s for lows, highs in the 40s. So a modest warming trend, but still pretty cold. And it's going to stay pretty chilly for into early next week. So this cold air is really going to settle in, and it's going to take a few days to break up this pattern and get some warm air back in here.
Now, for people like me, this is very exciting. I've always wanted to have a cold Christmas, but I know for some people this is awful. This is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are thinking about 2021 in February when we had that big freeze all over the state. But these temperatures are not going to be anything like that.
Well, the problem with the event in 2021 was there was freezing rain and things of that nature, which takes down power lines, which knocks out power obviously at one of the worst possible times when the temperature is dipping down so low, and it's hard to maintain any heat, and it's just that is miserable. This event is not really shaping up to be a freezing rain or mixed precipitation event. It's just we're going to get some rain on the front end, and then that cold air is going to come barreling on in, and it's just going to be a lot of cold. Now there are certain things we do need to prepare for this, though. So do you want to talk about that?
Oh, I definitely do. I mean, whenever 2021 happened and that freeze situation was going on, I had no idea what to do with my house. I did not have water, did not have power. It was very cold. But these are things that I didn't know about. I didn't know what to do. So what do you recommend?
So obviously it's the 4 P's: pets, plants, pipes, and people. So the pets are kind of obvious. If you have pets, they need to be indoors in this kind of weather. It's just too cold. The plants, some if you have things in pots, obviously they should be brought in as well. Anything, any tender vegetation is not going to survive this. If you have things that can't be moved outside, kind of like I do, I have a nice birds of paradise I've had for decades. You just need to go out there and cover it up as best you can. And in essence, what that does is it traps the long wave radiation coming up from the earth, and it stays a little warmer up under that cover that you put there. And that can help save a lot of your plants outdoors. In terms of your pipes, that's fairly obvious. You need to insulate, things that are outside. But you also want to drip your faucets when in this extreme cold. Now, I say drip. I want to emphasize this because the water utilities have all sorts of issues with low water pressure because everybody's dripping their faucets.
Right.
So you really want to make this as fine as you possibly can, just to keep the water moving a little bit in your pipes. But you don't want to be greedy and lower the water pressure for everybody because we all suffer from that. So you definitely want to take care of your pipes. And then, of course, people. This is where you need to look after look after the elderly, look after your neighbors that may not have everything in place and to get through these kinds of things. So take care of each other. It's Christmas time. Let's reach out and make sure everybody weathers this particular storm here. And then, of course, take care of yourself.
Yes.
You want to, when you go out, the coldest point in the day is right near sunrise. In fact, it's usually 2 minutes after sunrise on the average. Those hours around sunrise, that's the coldest point in the day. You don't want to be out and about in the freezing cold then. If you can wait till later in the afternoon when the temperature jumps up a little bit, look, believe me, 35 is a lot better than 20.
Yeah.
They're both, in my opinion, they're both miserably cold, but one is more miserable than the other. So, just be smart about it. It also makes sense, have your car gassed up just in case. If you lose power, at least you have that. You can go drive around, warm up in your car.
Well, thank you so much for coming in, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, stay warm.
Earlier this year, I talked with the CEO of a global company using technologies to eliminate harmful cyanobacteria algae from lakes and oceans of any size. Now, Bluegreen Water Technologies says it has developed a solution for the removal of gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere by focusing on oceans. Here's my conversation with Eyal Harel.
Your thoughts on carbon capture and net zero and reaching that, and the best way to reach that?
So I totally agree. I think net zero and the whole story of carbon removal and the reduction of carbon emissions worldwide is something of biblical proportions. I think in the history of humankind, we've never seen a single cause, a good one for a change, that unites almost all governments around the world, almost all corporates around the world, and so many individuals all joining behind a single flag to improve the quality of life on Earth. On a time scale perspective, it's completely new. This thing has been going on for quite some time, probably at least since the Kyoto Protocols a couple of decades ago. But when you're looking at when things really started getting traction, essentially the Paris Accords, that's in 2015, and especially since about 2 years ago. So you get all this money and all this pressure generated all over the world to achieve this single very important cause. And I think as a general statement, this is an amazing progress for humanity in the right direction. So the question of permanence is key. And what we're trying to advocate is that since the oceans and since water is the natural regulator of carbon in the atmosphere, since the oceans of the world are storing at present time 1/3 of all carbon in the world, the solution to the issue of carbon in the atmosphere is in the oceans. Now, there is not only a single solution that can be identified and used. There are multiple solutions, but the problem as of today is that the focus, everybody's attention is directed into land-based solutions. And those, unfortunately, really unfortunately, those are limited in scale, because to the extent that you can put filters on chimneys, to the extent that you can build facilities that would somehow, with minimal input of energy, take all this air and break it into its molecules and then store somewhere the CO2, which will then be taken somewhere and buried and all that, and assuming all that is in and of itself carbon neutral, then how scale could that possibly be? And the largest examples to date are simply generating insignificant numbers that, in order to turn into gigaton scale, which is what is needed, in order to turn them into gigaton scale, would mean something that we cannot do. It is estimated today that after everything is said and done, we'll still have to reduce, to take out of the atmosphere, mechanically or otherwise, take out of the atmosphere 5 to 10 billion tons of carbon every year as of 2050. 5 to 10 billion tons. Out of those 5 to 10 billion tons, 1 billion tons will have to be taken directly out of the atmosphere. So we'll have to create the mechanisms or invent the technologies that will suck up all this CO2 out of the atmosphere, 1 billion tons a year. For reference, the amount of carbon, and that is known as DAC, or direct air capture. The amount of direct air capture, that is the capacity of carbon that is taken out of the atmosphere today in 2020, end of 2022, we're talking about 10,000 tons. Again, remember, 1 billion in 2050, 10,000 tons, that's what's available. Take everything in the pipeline, combined, assuming best case scenario, everything works and it's scalable, you reach 1 million tons a year out of 1 billion that is needed. I mean, even if you're looking at just behind the corner, forget 2050. 2050 is a long time. Think about 2030. You know, all the governments and all the companies of the world have set, net zero targets for 2050 with ambitious goals for 2030. So by 2030, we'll need to reduce about 90 million tons in direct air capture. And again, the capacity today, with everything that is available, plus everything that is not yet available, but we have thought about, in total is 1 million, a little bit more than 1%. That kind of explains how far we are from the target we're setting for tomorrow, for 2030. And that's where the challenge is.
We know it's a monumental hill that has to be climbed, to say the least. And let's talk about what you're doing compared to burying under the ground, in simple terms, and one versus the other.
This is not a single company's effort. This is a global effort by any stretch. This is going to be a complicated fight in order for all of us to achieve success here. So I welcome, I encourage everybody to join this journey. We, as a company that is developing a new methodology for calculating how much carbon we actually sequester in the course of remediating harmful algal blooms, we share that methodology as an open source. We urge anybody who wants to use it to use it, anybody who wants to challenge it to challenge it. We're open for an open debate around that equation. We think it's for the benefit of everybody around, to have as much discussion and as much practice in it as possible, exactly for the reasons that you just mentioned. What we're doing is what is known, generally speaking, as nature-based. Trees are also nature-based. Now, by nature is, it's a very broad term, and there are different nature-based solutions. Trees is one, and slowly but surely, different methodologies are being developed that are moving into water, because as we mentioned before, water is the natural regulator of carbon in the atmosphere, and so you're seeing more and more solutions that are getting near. So the ones that already enjoy having a verified methodology is not blue carbon. Blue carbon entails, for example, mangrove trees are basically forests that grow in shallow waters, and seagrass, also shallow waters, and you get all this vegetation that, just like trees, they photosynthesis, they capture all this carbon to create biomass, to create more substance, and by doing so, they basically suck all the CO2 out of the atmosphere. This is a natural solution that, if you encourage it properly, you'll get the results that you're trying to achieve. And the methodology for those ideas are already in place, and they are being practiced today. Again, the problem with those ideas is that they are very, very limited in terms of space and their capacity to grow. Ultimately, a mangrove tree or a eucalyptus tree are joined by the fact that they grow very, very slowly, unfortunately, meaning their ability to absorb CO2 is quite limited. That is in stark contrast to algae. Algae grows 400 times faster than trees. Algae can double in biomass every couple of hours. That means that the ability of algae to absorb CO2 is unparalleled to anything in nature or out of nature.
Was your goal to capture carbon, or was it just to clean the algae that was choking the water and the life?
We started off with a global problem that was exacerbated by global warming, which was harmful algal blooms. They cover 60 million lakes around the world, 30 million square kilometers of ocean. It's a massive problem. They cause $270 billion in damages every year, and they were untreatable. In the process of remediating harmful algal blooms, we knew we were sequestering vast quantities of carbon, but that could not be monetized up until recently due to some other breakthroughs within our organization that allow us today to quantify just how much carbon we're actually able to sequester, because it goes back to the question you asked me before. How do you even know that you get all that carbon out of the equation? How do you quantify that? Let alone how do you monetize that? Right. But with recent breakthroughs, we've been able to do so.
Have you talked to people in Louisiana about this?
So we had a short conversation with the governor's office, but it was my impression that they were not there yet in terms of, putting together a concise plan for a statewide net zero plan. Again, the conversation is still at an early stage, and we hope that we can pick it up and continue the discussion. There's a lot of potential for not only for carbon removal in the state of Louisiana, but also for harmful algal bloom remediation, because that's also a problem that is plaguing Louisiana's lakes, and you can hit those two birds with one stone here.
There are many testimonials praising Bluegreen's work, but I wanted to hear for myself. So I called the mayor's office in Chippewa Lake, Ohio, and a community leader there, Bud Hardesty, told me after just one application, within 24 hours, the toxic algae on their lake was gone. But Hardesty told me it was, quote, like watching magic happen.
TikTok is a video sharing social media app that shows you content on just about anything. But recently, U.S. officials are questioning how secure the app really is and if U.S. citizens should be using it at all. In states like Iowa and Maryland, lawmakers have banned the TikTok's use for state workers, and similar calls for a ban are coming in from officials right here in Louisiana. Here to talk about this topic is political commentator Jim Engster. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Cara.
So first, let's talk about what are the security concerns that U.S. officials are worried about.
I think generally it's about elections and whether there could be fraud through the technology which is available. And we're talking about 1 billion people on the planet who are TikTok users. That's about 1 out of 8 people. It's an amazing success story in just 6 years. And it's obviously evident across the United States. There are people who spend a lot of time of their day on TikTok, and a lot of information is available. There's facial recognition. There are things that can be done to perhaps perpetuate fraud of all kinds. And in Louisiana, the Secretary of State, Eyal Harel, has expressed a concern about election integrity because of the technology of TikTok, which is owned by a Chinese company. And that, I think, is the biggest question. Former President Trump called for an all-out ban unless the Chinese sold TikTok. So we'll see where it goes, but the concern is valid. But at this point, all the calls for bans on use involve state use, not personal use. And I think that's where the rub comes if people are prohibited from using TikTok on a personal basis.
So like you were saying, I mean, this isn't the first time people have talked about banning TikTok. Whenever Trump was in office, I do remember this coming up and people were very concerned about it. But why just banning state use and not personal use if they're worried about, election integrity?
I think they're worried about getting into state machines, state technology. Personal use is not as much of a concern. It could be, though, and of course I think that's the concern for people who use it personally and like it, is that will my TikTok be taken away? But right now it looks like it's going to be directed at state use, and we certainly want our elections to be secure. We don't want any chicanery on that level. We are talking about the very process of our country if our elections are insecure. So this is a safeguard, and in Maryland it's being done by an outgoing Republican governor who's no fan of former President Trump, and the incoming governor there is a Democrat. So you would think they at least conferred on this, and it appears that this may very well have bipartisan support.
So here in Louisiana, I mean, like you said, Secretary of State has brought this up. Is it possible that we'll be joining both Iowa and Maryland and have our state workers not use TikTok?
It is possible. I think this will be a campaign issue for governor, and we're talking about an election now that is inside 10 months. And right now, the two Republicans who are the front runners are one who's in the race, Jeff Landry, the Attorney General, and one who might be in the race, U.S. Senator John Kennedy. They are both acolytes, if you will, of former President Trump. They like him and have been supportive of him on any number of fronts. And they quite likely agreed with his position on TikTok. So we'll see what they propose as potential governors. And it's something, of course, that all the Democrats and other candidates will weigh in on as well.
There are lots of pros and cons to taking away an entire social media app. So are there any negatives to doing something like this? Are there any, pros?
Well, in America, we're accustomed to freedom, but something like this is a safeguard of sorts. But when you look at the countries that have banned TikTok, most of them are not democratic governments. They're places like Iran. And we're not a government like Iran, thank goodness. So we'll see how this goes. But this in the United States would be a last resort, not a first option. But I do think that we'll see what happens on the state level. And if that is insufficient, then TikTok could go away as we know it. But right now, it appears that it will be limited to those who are involved in government issues and government use.
All right, so there's a lot to weigh here and a lot that's at stake, but thank you so much for coming in and talking about this topic.
My pleasure. Happy holidays.
When the state legislature begins its 2023 session, it will have an extra $1.5 billion of money in the budget, which has been forecast now by the Revenue Estimating Panel. Dr. Stephen Barnes, who is busy with UL Lafayette Kathleen Babineau Blanco Center and also as a member of the Revenue Estimating Conference. You're part of that group. This is a number you had come up with, and it's a surprise. It's a huge number. And what does it mean for us?
Well, it certainly means that the legislature is going to have a lot of additional money to spend. We're going to have to decide what are our priorities looking forward and where are the greatest needs across state government. I think it's important, though, at a really high level to think about how this compares to year over year, because this in many ways is more a reflection of the economy has held, so we're seeing a good outlook for revenues compared to what we had feared last time we met, which is that we might start to see more of a slowdown.
People, if they would hear we have this huge surplus, you have to understand a lot of that is COVID-related money, but the economy and the price of gas and groceries, those aren't things making people feel any better.
That's right. I think there's a little disconnect between kind of some of the economic anxiety that a lot of people are feeling right now and what sounds like a good news story that revenues for the state are looking good.
And at a time we're at all-time low unemployment, right?
That's right. There are some positive signals out there in the economy. There are also some pretty significant areas of concern, most notably inflation. And in fact, when we think about those higher prices that we're all feeling when we go to the store, that's translating into higher sales tax revenues. So something that might be an area of economic concern does generate more revenue, which is something that we'll have to think about as a state.
Higher oil prices also, right?
That's right. That's right. Prices in general, that's right, have been quite strong and has factored into our what we feel at the pump.
The one thing we know right now that need attention would be early childhood education, some of the child welfare programs, education across the board. These are things that we know this money could be used for. What else would be a priority in your mind?
Well, I think it is really important that we step back and we think about what are we spending our money on through state government. That is in part because we're seeing such high inflation, and alongside that, a parallel trend of increasing wages. That's going to be something that comes back to be a real challenge for state government when we see the costs of running state government going up and up over time. That's true for highway and bridge projects. That's also true for what we need to be thinking about in terms of teacher pay and levels of funding for early childhood.
I mean, this is sort of the time to seize the moment, it seems like. Take advantage of it and be prudent at the same time.
That's right. That's right. I think we want to make sure that we're putting those dollars where our priorities are. We don't want to overextend ourselves, so I think making sure that we continue to use a significant chunk of that for one-time funding so we don't lock ourselves up in a higher level of spending that we can't sustain. And then also, as the director of the Blanco Public Policy Center, I will always say, let's make sure that we are tracking what we do.
And everyone, that's our show for this week. Remember, you can watch anything LPB anytime, wherever you are, with our LPB PBS app.
You can catch LPB news and public affairs shows as well as other Louisiana programs you've come to enjoy over the years. And please like us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram.
For everyone at Louisiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Andre Moreau.
And I'm Kara St. Cyr.
Until next time, that's the state we're in.
Every day, I go to work for Entergy.
I know customers are counting on me.
So Entergy is investing millions of dollars
to keep the lights on
and installing new technology
to prevent outages before they happen.
Together,
we power life.
Additional support provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation and the Ziegler Art Museum located in Jennings City Hall. The museum focuses on emerging Louisiana artists and is an historical and cultural center for Southwest Louisiana. And the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting, with support from viewers like you.